Ralph White.
Oh, Roger, good to see you. Looks like we've somehow arrived in Lisbon, both of us. So.
Yeah, it does. I'm just going to go for a swim.
Yeah, I'll take a quick visit to the castle up on the hill.
Yeah, there you go. Look, I got my summer clothes on all ready for Portugal, which has got one of the best climates in the world.
It's a wonderful place. I'm really looking forward to it.
So, folks, what we're going to do in this presentation, we're going to take you through in detail the pre-conference events. We're going to go through all the lectures and workshops and our wonderful teachers at the main conference. And then Ralph's going to take us also on the post-conference journey. So I have put together a presentation for this. So, but why I'm getting that up on the screen here, Ralph, just go for it. Give us a little introduction to the Portugal Esoteric Quest.
Yes, I'll just say at the outset that this is the 16th or 17th Esoteric Quest we've done. And there was a prior conversation I had with Roger that spoke more about the history of these quests. So they've been going on since 1995, although we've had a 3-year gap now because of the pandemic. We had first planned to do this in Portugal and Spain 2.5 years ago, as you can imagine. So Portugal, yes, it's been described as the most esoterically alive country in Europe by no less an authority than the Sorbonne's professor of Western Esotericism, speaking to Jocelyn Godwin, who told me. So Portugal, of course, unlike Bulgaria, which is where we just did the last Esoteric Quest, which is off most people's radar, although it shouldn't be, it's a wonderful place. Of course, we all think we know Portugal. We know where it is geographically, and we've all heard of Portugal for a long time, of course. But in fact, it's a culture filled with depth and beauty and all kinds of unexpected history. I have found it absolutely fascinating to get into Portugal. And as you can see here, it has multiple layers of history. Lusitania, the Romans, the Phoenicians, the Celts, the Visigoths, the Moors, of course. It was part of Al-Andalus for many centuries. It's had a very important Jewish community and so on. But we're going to have a particular focus with our quest. The 4 days of the conference proper will be in Tomar, the center of it is medieval town of Tomar, about 2 hours north of Lisbon, which was the stronghold of the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar who have evoked great fascination through the centuries, and quite rightly so too. So here we are, yes, Esoteric Quest Portugal. There are 3 dimensions to the quest, as there always are. There are pre-conference days in Lisbon. We will begin in Lisbon on the 2nd of June. We'll settle in, have dinner that night. The next day, we have a choice of either going to the monastery of, here we go, Hermetic, Alchemical, Masonic, and Sufi, Lisbon. In the morning, we will be out at the extraordinary Jerónimos Monastery near in the Belém district, which is filled, dates from the Age of Discovery, is filled with esoteric imagery. And in the afternoon, we will return to Alfama, the district, the warren of ancient streets that's at the port of Lisbon, which is the birthplace of Fado, and was also an Islamic neighborhood. So we will have a kind of Sufi journey through in the afternoon in Alfama, after we've been at what we're seeing on the screen here. That is the Jerónimos Monastery, right as the Tajus River opens out into the ocean, and the area where the Age of Discovery, and of course Portugal was the first of the European nations to really enter into the ocean, the great ocean, and down the coast of Africa and so on. And they were, of course, Vasco da Gama and Magellan and people like that. The other pre-conference option is here. This is a very mysterious well in the town of Sintra. Sintra is about 45 minutes or so outside Lisbon. We will have to leave early on the morning of the 3rd to get there. But it was built, a lot of it, in the 18th century by somebody who, with a deep attunement to the esoteric history of Portugal, a deep connection to the Masonic traditions and to the myths of that animate a lot of Portuguese esotericism. So here you see a well, sometimes referred to as the well of initiation, but this whole estate there called Quinta da Regalera is filled with mysterious symbolism, and we will be guided around it by Manuel Gandra, who is one of Portugal's leading historians and writers about the more esoteric dimensions of Portuguese culture. So yeah, we'll be there all morning. When we get back from both of those, either Sintra or Alfama, as it will be on the other one, we will return to we're going to be staying at, or some of us, I recommend that anybody who can stays there. We have 20 beds reserved there in the Lisbon Pessoa Hotel. Now here you have a wonderful shot from a Portuguese banknote of Fernando Pessoa himself. He's the kind of, you see his face everywhere in Lisbon. He was this extraordinary poet, literary genius, more than a poet. When he died at a fairly early age in the 1930s, I believe it was, he had only really published one book of poems, but when they went to his apartment, they opened a chest and they found 25,000 manuscripts in there. And he creates this whole literary genre of heteronyms, more than just figures created by a novelist, but individualities with literary styles, philosophies, views, conversations, opinions of Fernando Pessoa. And he was somebody also, he considered himself a contemporary Templar. He was certainly deeply interested in astrology. There is for those who get there early, there's a Fernando Pessoa museum in Lisbon. I recommend that people visit that. And I should also say too that the first day when we arrive, or those who arrive early enough on the 2nd to go to the Gulbenkian Museum, there will be an exhibit of Sufi art at the Gulbenkian Museum on the 2nd. What we're talking about here with Pessoa and the virtual visit, that is the 3rd. So here we are. Yes, so then the main conference itself is the 4th to the 8th. And as it says, the legendary stronghold of the Knights Templar. It's 2 hours north of Lisbon. There will be a bus for everybody who does the pre-conference experiences. We will all be staying in the Hotel dos Templarios. Portuguese is filled with sounds. It's such a beautiful language. So that where we will, yeah, that's where it will start. And we will begin with lunch on June the 4th and finish on June the 8th. So we'll have four days in the wonderful town of Tomar. So just to give you some sense of some of our presenters, my good friend Paul Bembridge there will be speaking to us about Priscillian, an extraordinary figure in 4th century Galicia who was a Gnostic Christian, a full believer in the equality of men and women, and a fascinating figure before Christian religious orthodoxy established itself. Amanda Booth is an English actor who has been living in Portugal for many years, I think about 25 years. Her daughter, in fact, is one of Portugal's most famous actresses. Anyway, she's going to give us a one-woman performance on the evening of the 3rd, before dinner, on the life of Fernando Pessoa, this extraordinary totemic figure considered the greatest poet in Portuguese since the 16th century, and the Lusiads that told stories of the great adventures of Vasco da Gama and people like that. Fabrizio Boscaglia, he is an expert on Sufism in Portugal. I was told about Fabrizio's work by some of our friends from Spain. Pablo Beneto, those of us who were with us in Granada for the Esoteric Quest on the Golden Age of Andalusia. Sufis, Kabbalists, and Christian philosophers will remember the wonderful Pablo Benito, and it was thanks to Pablo that he introduced me to Fabrizio and to Paolo themselves. So Paolo is a deep expert on the work of Fernando Pessoa. He's a professor of philosophy at the University of Lisbon. He also has a meditation center outside the city, and he is profound, I can say the least. We have our musicians. No trip to Portugal should be without Fado, you know, the wonderful longing turned into melody, that incredibly soulful music and dance that comes out of the longing, so much of the longing, because Portugal was the first European nation to cross the oceans. The longing felt by becalmed sailors in Brazil or Mozambique or wherever it may be for their sweethearts and loves, and also the whole world of the taverns and the women who worked there because there was no choice. That was how they made a living in those days. So, and the beautiful music that came out of there, really. And this word that we put in the subtitle of the conference, saudade, it means, well, I guess a crude translation is soul, but it's this unique Portuguese quality of melancholy, longing, yearning, depth. If any of you can get hold of the DVD Fado, Fados, it's a wonderful DVD with dance and some of the finest fadistas and musicians. Manuel Gandra will be our guide in Sintra. He has published numerous books. He is one of Portugal's leading authorities. He's actually the creator of the Portuguese Hermetic Museum, which we will be visiting on our third day in Tomar, and which is next to a Templar interpretation center and a castle, Almirall Castle, a wonderful castle, Templar castle in the middle of a river that we will go to that afternoon. Leonard George, great shot of Leonard there. Leonard has been on many quests with us. I think the first one was in Florence, Italy in 2000, where I always have to say that he met his wife, Marjorie Waroth, in our extraordinary conference, also attended by Jocelyn in Florence in 2000 on the Italian Renaissance and the esoteric traditions. So Leonard is one of those encyclopedic folks. He's a psychologist. He's the author of 2 books, Crimes of Perception, an Encyclopedia of Heresies, Alternative Realities. He's a lifelong student of esotericism and a wonderful presenter. Jocelyn Godwin will be known to probably most of us who have read within the whole canon of Western esoteric work. Jocelyn is one of the best-known writers on the Western tradition. He's originally a Brit, but he's lived in America for many years and taught at Colgate University for a long time. Rui Lomelina de Freitas is somebody deeply imbued with Portuguese esotericism, mysticism, the connection to Templars, Rosicrucianism, etc. Christopher McIntosh is another person he was at Chesky Grumlov. He and Jocelyn and myself and Scott, we were all there when it all began in 1925, but Christopher is another person with a vast mind, author of multiple books, more recently novels and short stories, but historical studies of the Rose Cross and the Age of Reason, all kind of occult Russia, in fact, is his latest book on pagan, esoteric, and mystical traditions in Russia. So Christopher always brings an elegance, a warmth, just a vastness of knowledge. Scott Olson, who looks like he's still in the jungles in the Amazon in that particular picture. Scott is the author of a wonderful book on the golden section, Nature's Greatest Secret, has participated and has spoken at nearly all the quests. And as somebody with a deep attunement to sacred geometry, sacred mathematics, he's going to be speaking about Platonic design and principles within some of the great medieval churches of Europe, particularly the 12th century. Marjorie Roth is has given so many wonderful presentations over the years on Tarantella in Sicily, on the extraordinary women of Egypt, Hypatia and others when we were in Alexandria together. And this year she'll be speaking about the songs of the pilgrims along the Camino. As I'm sure many of us know, the Camino of Santiago de Compostela is probably the most famous pilgrimage route in the Western world. It's been operative since the 9th century. Some people think from before that rather. But today it is less of a, for some people, of course, perhaps for a third of people, it is still a major Catholic pilgrimage, as it were. But for the majority of participants, it's an interspiritual journey. And so we'll be taking that southern route. And then last but certainly not least, the redoubtable Yuri Stoyanov, who's another encyclopedic person. Yuri played a crucial role last year in when we were in Bulgaria. He is from Bulgaria originally. He's the author of a wonderful book called The Hidden Tradition in Europe. So he is an expert on the Bogomils, these Gnostic Manichaean Christians, so they would not have called themselves that. The holy religion of light in the Balkans, how it made its way west into the Cathar world. And so Yuri spoke wonderfully about the Cathars and their connection to all kinds of profound streams when we did our Esoteric Quest in the south of France 5 or 6 years ago, particularly about the Cathars and troubadours. Well, and there's yours truly. That's me on the left there. That's I've been doing this for a long time. It's still amazing to me that after when we created the first one in 1995 in the southern Bohemian mecca of alchemists, Chesky Krumlov. I mean, who would have guessed that it would still be going on all these years later? But it is. And there's Carrie Wyckoff, who many of you will know, who's our logistics supremo, the maestro of making sure everything works and runs on time, and then everybody's on the bus, and so on. And then of course the lovely Andrea Rotlamanto, who is our registrar and charming person, maestro of detail, fun individual. And together, the three of us, there's an extraordinary synergy. I don't know how many quests we've done together. I know at least 10, maybe, or more, maybe 12. So anyway, we're very fortunate to have this team to make this happen. All right, now on to our plenaries here, which is the word we use for the morning talks. Usually they're in the morning. Not the first day we get to Tomar, but they're attended by everybody. And so we wanted to go back and, follow a bit of a historical trajectory in our attunement to Portugal, because for many of us, it will be a new culture that we'll be attuned to. So Leonard will begin with the traces of the quest in prehistoric Iberia. And of course, it goes way, way back there. In fact, I just believe just a couple of months ago, a completely new megalithic site has just been discovered on the southern borders of Portugal and Spain, with an enormous number of stones and dolmens. It's not quite in the league of Karnak in Brittany, but it's up there. It was completely unknown until recently. So Leonard will bring alive that whole world of Iberia and what it was before the Romans and the Phoenicians got there, and so on. Then, the second part of that first morning, let's go into the spirit of Portugal. And as I mentioned, Paulo Borges is a very well-known writer and scholar on the nature of the Portuguese soul, and an expert on the work of Fernando Pessoa, a philosopher and a longtime meditation teacher too. So, as he says here, Portugal has been known as the extreme west, the land of Lusitania, the land of Lusus, son of Dionysus, and god of liberation. And Fado, first danced, then sung, is the catharsis of the passions tying the soul in space and time. So anyway, that's just to give you a hint of, and this is, I think that's Emilia Rodriguez. They're the most famous of all the Fadistas. Just so returning to earlier times too, I mentioned him earlier in speaking about Paul Bembridge. Priscillian is this extraordinary figure from the 4th century who was a unorthodox Gnostic Christian teacher and philosopher in Galicia, which is, of course, the northwest part of Spain. That is the Celtic part of Spain, really, for those of us like myself who are attuned to the Celtic world. You have Galicia in Spain, Brittany, in northwest France, of course, and Cornwall and southwest England and Wales, the sort of Brythonic Celtic world there, and also its connections with the Gaelic Celts, the Irish and Scots. So anyway, this is where Priscillian operated, and as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that he was really noted for was his belief in the complete equality of men and women, and he had a huge following before the heel of orthodoxy was established, when the whole empire, Roman Empire, became Christian next to Constantine. Okay, then we will also look again. You can look, if you look on the map there on the right, you don't have to be an imaginative genius to see a certain face in there. So Portugal has long been seen as having this unusual destiny revealed in its visage. And people think it's a Mediterranean country, but of course it's not. It faces the Atlantic. And so it was founded, as Manuel's saying here, in 1128. It's really a very old country. And one of the reasons that we're able to meet in Tomar is because one of its kings, King Danish, a troubadour, whose work we can still read, was able to work it out for the Templars to return in Portugal after they were so horribly suppressed elsewhere. So we look forward to hearing from Manuel, and we will be going, as I mentioned, to his Portuguese Hermetic Museum in the little town of Barquinha, and I think it's our 3rd morning in Tomar. Okay. Yes, the Templars and the Grail Impulse. Well, you know, the Templars have been known as the Knights of the Grail. There are many possible connections there, going back to the work of Wolfram von Eschenbach, Parsifal, also Titurel, and Chrétien de Troyes, these extraordinary Grail stories that appeared in medieval Europe, and have long had an association with the Knights Templar. So there are, there are fantasies, of course. There's only so much that is known historically about them, but they were certainly deeply mysterious and certainly deeply esoteric. And so we will go into everything they brought when they were, they came into being after the Crusades to be protectors of the pilgrim route to the Middle East. But then they built a whole temple there on the site of the Temple of Solomon and what is now the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, and then evolved into a whole other international order of great integrity and spiritual mystery, and of course most of us will know they were very horribly suppressed by a conspiracy between the French king and the Pope in the early 14th century. So, obviously this is going to be a major theme for us, the Grail sagas, the Cathars, and of course, Yuri Stoyanov, who is such an authority on the hidden tradition in Europe, the Cathars, their relationship to the Bogomils. Yuri, in fact, told me that the first image of the Rose Cross ever appeared in Portugal, and there is certainly a connection between the Knights Templar and the symbolism of the Rose Cross. And of course, the very first quest that we did before we even called them quest back in 1995 in Český Krumlov, the alchemical Mecca in Bohemia. It was called the Rosicrucian Enlightenment Revisited, referring to the late 16th, early 17th century, sometimes known as the Rosicrucian Enlightenment. So the Knights Templar again, this is Christopher McIntosh, who's somebody with a huge knowledge in this field. And we're looking here at the beautiful convent inside the great castle of the Knights Templar. This was an important stop for the pilgrims making their way along the Camino, along the southern route. Of course, most people, including myself, thought until about 3 years ago that even though there were multiple routes coming in from France or even Germany, they came over the Pyrenees, made their way along the northern edge of Spain to Galicia. But in fact, there is a southern route moving through Portugal, passing through Tomar. And this is one of its most significant stopping points. And we will be following that one. Okay. And then, yes, Marjorie, Marjorie, who is such a wonderful musician and a wonderful scholar of music. She and her husband, Leonard George, are just producing a new book on esotericism and music. And so, Compostela, some people think that's a reference to the field of stars. So here you have an image of the actual cathedral in Santiago de Compostela with the starlit skies behind them. So Marjorie will be telling us of, and I imagine performing, singing, playing, taking us into the whole world of what the pilgrims sang as they walked along that journey. And of course, it's a lot of those pilgrims didn't come back, and it was not something you undertook in a mellow way, and it was months and months. So we're going to have our taste of it. We're not going to walk the whole thing. Those who want to take the bus can, but we will walk portions of it for those who choose. And so maybe we, when we are walking on the post-conference, can sing some of the songs that Marjorie is going to tell us about. Okay. Yes, and as I had mentioned before, the whole Iberian Peninsula, the vast majority of the Iberian Peninsula was Islamic for many years, from about the 7th century, right? Because the last bastion of Al-Andalus was Granada, fell in 1492, which is where we did our quest on the Golden Age of Andalusia. But Portugal was indeed included in as part of this. There was a small band of Christian states up in the north, but the vast majority of the Iberian Peninsula was Islamic. And of course, there was a whole Sufi tradition in there. The Muslim culture of Iberia for 600 or 700 years had a huge amount of wonder and beauty to it. And we know more about Cordoba and Granada and other parts now in Spain. But I'm really looking forward to learning more about Portugal's role. In fact, the main castle in Lisbon actually was built by the Moors. So Fabrizio, who is a scholar of Sufism in Portugal, will tell us all about it. And he's also a real scholar of Fernando Pessoa's work, as we know. So Pessoa was a neo-Templar, was deeply into many spiritual and esoteric things, and is really the national poet of Portugal right now. Okay. And then Lima de Freitas, so here we see him, whose work, he's a public artist. Some of his work is at, I believe, in train stations. Yes, painting in the magical realist style, wrote books on art and numerology. And so, yes, if anybody finds themselves in the Rossio station in Lisbon, he paints a mystic history of Portugal with, as Jocelyn says here, a public display of esoteric imagery that is likely to appear in no other country. So when I said at the outset that Portugal may be the most esoterically alive country in Europe, this is a living illustration of it. And of course, Jocelyn, should be an S in there before his name, but of course, Jocelyn is one of our most comprehensive and actually compelling scholars and enjoyable speakers. It's always a pleasure to have Jocelyn there. So he'll take us into the world of that. Then now we're going into the workshops. Usually the workshops are in the afternoon. We break up into 2 or 3 groups. So it's a smaller, more intimate experience. There's more chance to interact with the presenter. And Yuri, who we've already met. Well, I have to say, I love that painting, from medieval chivalry and prophecy to the age of discovery. So of course that is a lot of what Portugal is about, from those earliest roots up through the Templars, all the way through to the well, it would be the 15th century, when Prince Henry the Navigator, who was the Grand Master of the Knights of Christ, as they were known, the successors to the Templars, when he had his school of navigation with Arabic and Jewish cartographers and so on, and they set out to explore the whole world of the Atlantic Ocean and the coast of Africa. So Yuri will take us into that, link those worlds. Yes, okay, on to the next one. That's Scott Olson. We spoke about him already, and he's the expert on the golden section. This is actually the Cathedral of Burgos in northern Spain. It's on the northern route of the Camino. This is the birthplace of El Cid. Many of us will have seen, many of us of a certain age will have seen El Cid, the movie with Charlton Heston, which I have to admit I enjoy. So, of course, those medieval churches there are filled with Platonic imagery. The School of Chartres is the best known example of it, thanks to the work of Keith Critchlow and others. But many of these beautiful 12th century cathedrals have these same deep Platonic geometrical architectural principles, calling on sacred dimensions that have been known since ancient times. So that's what Scott will do. Paul, as you know, Paul actually, he was with us in Sicily, and there he gave a presentation. People don't realize it, but the Normans actually conquered Sicily and actually threw the Muslims out of Sicily. Some of the same people at the Battle of Hastings were also at the battle to take Sicily. It's extraordinary to think that. But the Normans had their own deep relationship to the Grail stories and some of the art that you can see in Palermo and elsewhere. So I love what Paul says here about this. In the bloodstained chronicles of history, the Templars fight against Muslims on the front line in Spain and the Holy Land. But in this wonderful story by Wolfram von Espenbar, Parsifal, the Templars are keepers of the Grail, a strange object whose power brings Muslims and Christians together in lasting peace. So, of course, this is the true, it's been said that these Grail stories were a rebirth of esoteric Christianity at a time when Christianity had fallen into a lot of decadence. It was a return to the true purity and nobility. So yes, that's what Paul will cover here. And then Rui, we talk about how Portugal is said to be the place where the first image of the Rose Cross appeared. And we'll look at the connection between the Grail, the Cathars, and the Rose Cross with Rui. Prince Henry the Navigator, something of a controversial figure. I mentioned Malcolm Kennard has been with us in many quests. Malcolm is an extraordinary researcher. He just spills out insight and knowledge of these different historic figures. And yeah, Portugal, of course, you can't, like all imperial nations, it's having to engage with its own history, its own relationship with the slave trade. But of course, these were crusading times, and the goal was to, they thought that they could go around the south of Africa. They had no idea it extended as far south as it does, and that they could come up on the eastern side, because at this time Constantinople was under threat from the Turks, and working with the armies of Prester John, the mythical Christian king in Ethiopia or Asia, retake the Holy Land from the east. Uh, didn't happen. Obviously, Africa turned out to be a lot longer than they imagined, but an extraordinary figure. And I'm sure Malcolm will do a great job in bringing him alive for us. And the fabled kingdom of Prester John. And then Paulo, as you know, Paulo is so. I think he's written 7 books on Pessoa, a really fascinating figure that most of us in the English-speaking world don't know a lot about. And so it's time we did. That's one of the great poets of the 20th century, and somebody whose music has, whose poems have been put to Fado. If you ever see that wonderful DVD Fados, some beautiful, beautiful lyrics there were written by Pessoa. So yeah. And then Leonard again, Leonard, who was with us in Florence, where I met Leonard when we did the Italian Renaissance and the Esoteric Traditions, and of course the leading light, or certainly one of the leading lights of the Florentine Renaissance, with this remarkable figure here, Marsilio Ficino, translator, philosopher, musician. Okay, so now we have the strange world of Neo-Templarism. I think I'll leave Christopher to go into that. Obviously, there are some strange dimensions to it today, some that are authentic, some that are not, and some that can have disturbing political dimensions, but doesn't mean to say the Templars themselves weren't remarkable figures. Okay? And, here, this is I'm really glad Jocelyn is going to cover this, because no visit to attunement to the history of the spiritual history of Portugal could be complete without this. This terrible earthquake in 1755, Lisbon was considered a holy city. It was filled, well, maybe that's going too far, but it was filled with monasteries and nunneries. I'm sorry to say the Inquisition still had a role there right up until the 18th century. But then this devastating earthquake just leveled the whole city. Voltaire was there, witnessed it, and it changed the whole of Europe's conception of God. How could God permit this very religious city to be devastated the way it was? So the many deep philosophical questions there that Johnson will take us into. So, okay, let's go on. Then these are, in the afternoon, because it's not all talks, of course, it's an experiential thing. I always say that the quests are a combination of 4 factors. One is the learning, of course, that we've been talking about. The other is the ambience, just to be there. You feel it in your body. The third is the arts, having music, dance, poetry. It's just a crucial part of this, taking us into the soul of Portugal. And then fourthly, it's the conviviality, the warmth, the human connection. Many lifelong friendships have been formed along the quest. I call it the fellowship of the quest. But yes, we've already looked at the interior of the convent in the castle of Tomar. We'll go there one afternoon. It's very impressive. This is a sense of the little town of Tomar. It's quite beautiful. A lot of pedestrian walking. Only this is down the street, which has the synagogue. It has actually Portugal's oldest synagogue, and which was built during the time of Henry the Navigator when he was Grand Master. So we will visit the synagogue as part of our walking tour of the town. And I've also already mentioned the Hermetic Museum and that wonderful castle. We will, I'm looking forward to visiting that Templar castle, of course, because the Templars were a crucial part of the Reconquista. So, and then evening, we always have evening events. We will be at the Tomar castle in the realm of the Templars for one evening, probably our second evening. In Tomar, we'll be up there in that world and feeling it. You can really feel it strongly. It's, there's a huge park next to it. Yes, let's, very evocative. Fado Poema. These are Portuguese friends of the quests who singers, guitarist, cello player. They'll bring us a taste, an evening of Fado in Tomar. And then also, I think they will also come in, make a short guest appearance our second night, and help welcome people to Portugal when we're in Lisbon. And then our last night of the quest, it'll be the fairy tale, quite rightly described as the fairy tale medieval town of Óbidos, about an hour away from Tomar, which is stepping into, it's known as a town of books now. And it's a walled hilltop village, in which we'll dine in a restaurant surrounded by books, ancient old books especially, and we'll hear some poetry. Some of the great poets, some of the great Spanish poets. I'm sure would imagine that people like Robert Bly, the great American poet who was with us on many of the quests in the earlier years. So some of the great Spanish poets and some of the great Portuguese poets who I look forward to learning more about. That will be part of our dinner that last night in Óbidos. So, okay. And now begins, the third part of the quest, which is always what can I say? It's totally integral. I can't imagine. I've had the good fortune to go on all the post-conference journeys. So this year we're just doing one, the Portuguese way to the heart of Galicia, along the Camino of Santiago de Compostela. So there you see the trail there. So we will set off from Tomar. Of course, those people who may just want to do the conference proper, they would return to Lisbon at that point or go on to wherever they want to go. But the rest of us, we will set off on the Camino. We have a choice. We can walk the first 5 or 6 kilometers, as the pilgrims did, by the river out of Tomar. We'll be heading towards Coimbra, the second, a very important historic city, a birthplace of Fado, a place with deep connection to the troubadours. And then going on from there to the Douro Valley, where wine has been grown for 2,000 years. Because we think of Portugal, we think of port. But it's a wonderful, evocative area. We'll be staying in a farmhouse or farmhouse-like dwelling in this beautiful valley. And then before we will head down to Porto, the second city of, which is a very evocative, romantic, historic place. And we're expecting to learn there about the Jewish community, especially. There's an author we're hoping to connect with, who wrote a book called The Last Kabbalist of Lisbon. He's an American who lives there, and we want to really go deeper into the Jewish history of this part of Portugal as well. So yes, there we are. Let's we move on from Porto. And then we have a number of opportunities to walk the Camino. Never, there's always be an opportunity to take the bus. But when we'll make our way up the coast from Porto, Braga, Pontevedra, these were ancient towns, going back to Phoenician times, Roman times, when Portugal was the province of Lusitania. And we'll be stopping at these beautiful towns for some of their ancient and spiritual traditions. For instance, this one is the Queimada Gallega, a Galician ritual that honors the elements of earth, water, air, and fire, where the people of Pontevedra have practiced this for a long time. So we will have the opportunity to actually walk across the border from Portugal into Spain. So don't get your passports. And then, we will make our way to Santiago on, I think it's the 5th day, which of course is where the big cathedral is. And we'll have time to explore there, both by ourselves and as a group. Some people may choose to leave at that point because there is an airport in Santiago. But the true end of the pilgrimage trail, the Camino, is the suitably named Finisterre or Finiterre, the end of the earth, which we're looking at here. It's the actual tip of the Galician Peninsula, and that's where the real Camino comes to an end. So it will be the end, not just of the post-conference journey along the Camino, but also of our whole 13, 14-day quest. So we'll have a lot of time to integrate, to meditate, to contemplate the ocean, to have our closing circle. And then we'll bring everybody back to Santiago the next day so they can fly out to, and there are many flights because there are so many pilgrims who come to Santiago from around the world. There are flights to many, many places from Santiago. So that's our quest. Now it's just going on to, that's the post-conference, isn't it? So that's
yeah, this is the post-conference, and there's 5 nights or 6 nights involved.
Yes, you can see there the 5 nights accommodation. It's all meals, include through to lunch on the 8th. All for activities, transport, guided tour, you name it. Everything is
Everything's covered. The only price differential there is whether you want a double share or single accommodation.
Yes, and so you can either get off in Santiago or go on to the true end of the Camino in Finisterre for 6 nights. So doubles and singles, etc. I should say that for those of you watching this who've been to prior quests, everything has been done very personally. Those of you know Andrea, our wonderful registrar, but we're trying to streamline it a bit more, so that we're trying to do as much registration as we can online. So the website should enable people to actually completely register for everything online, meaning that we have less in the way of phone calls we have to make. Okay, so then
there's the pre-conference. Yeah, I've got here the accommodation. No, sorry, the pre-conference tour, 495. That's the pre-conference days, all inclusive. But
yeah, I should just say about accommodation, it's a little different than usual.
Here's the accommodation.
Here's our main will be centered on the Lisbon Pessoa Hotel, which I strongly recommend. I loved it. I stayed there when I was in Lisbon last summer. Of course, it's the whole theme is of Fernando Pessoa, and each of the rooms is dedicated to a different heteronym, these extraordinary literary figures that he created out of his imagination. He was very interested in astrology, so you actually have the astrological chart of each heteronym. And I don't know if we have any other example of this in modern literature, but of a writer actually creating characters, fully fledged, amazingly vital, dynamic, totally different characters with reference to their astrological chart. Anyway, so the Lisbon Pessoa Hotel, that is a lovely place. So there's a wonderful deck up there with fabulous views up on the 5th floor with great views over the city, the castle. We'll have our second evening, we'll be up there, hopefully for some Fado. I think that is going to work out. And so
okay, now here's the main conference.
Yeah, here's the main conference. It's the Hotel dos Templarios in Tomar. We will bus people up. It's a 2-hour bus ride essentially from Lisbon to Tomar. And yeah, it's a really lovely hotel, and that's
beautiful price, a very reasonably priced too. The single room, 450 for the whole event.
Yeah, we try to do this as inexpensively as possible, and so yes, this is
here's the main conference here, Ralph. Booking early by April the 3rd.
Yes, this is really important. Please do remember, try to do the early bird. There's a discount there. It's also very helpful for us in many ways. So that's the early bird rate that expires on April 3rd, and then the whole reg will have to close it about a month before the conference begins. So we encourage you to take the early bird there.
Good.
There we go.
Yeah.
Right there.
There you go. Now tell us a little bit about some of the scholarships involved.
Yes. We want to really encourage young people to participate in this. When we first started doing these esoteric conferences, it was in Bohemia, Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic as it became. And it was very inexpensive. The cost of living was 1/5 of what it was in New York, say. But of course, those days are gone, and Europe is on the euro, so things are not, even though the exchange rate is relatively favorable for Americans right now, still it's, it costs. We can't do we are a non-profit, and we're not trying to do this to make money, but it has to be viable. So as a result, we really want to make scholarships available to young people. How do we define young people? Let's say people under 35. I mean, of course, I would really, to me, it's important to have as broad a demographic as we can have. So people who are still entering the prime of their creative lives, who can bring this work, whether they're writers, photographers, artists, psychologists, or just regular people. It's wonderful. We do this work in a way so that to bring alive the lost spiritual history of the West, to bring alive these wonderful forgotten or half-forgotten traditions that are so alive, but we want it to be poured into people's work, into their creative work. So of course we're happy to have people of every background and age, but we do want to make sure that it's feasible for people to come. And of course, the more participants we have in the quest, the more resources we have to be able to offer scholarships.
Yeah. So you can always contact us about more information about the scholarship.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Thank you, Ralph. That's wonderful
Roger,
material. It's wonderful.
you.
I'm really excited about getting to Portugal. I'm packed and ready to go.
Yeah,
So folks,
I'm ready for it. Give me my Vino Verde, and yeah, I just like, things I really like about Portugal is it's more multicultural. You got more people of color because of Mozambique and Brazil and Indonesia and so on. So it's nice to have that. Yeah.
Well, I've been to about at least 12 of these events, and I have co-sponsored it and promoted it in many ways. And of course, the Academy Sacred Geometry, it's it's a broad curriculum. Every year we do sponsorships, and we often get Scott Olson to be teaching, and we've put on various events, the Sacred Geometry Celebration. And so if anybody's interested, the email is here, info@Academy Sacred Geometry.
Yeah.
And send me an email and I'll be able to link you up with more information and get you over to the details. I'll be able to send you a brochure, a PDF brochure, and link you up with the registration, and any details you can follow that up. So